The oil and gas industry is under increasing pressure to stop leaks of methane from their production operations. We read a lot about increasing regulations, but in these episodes, we will talk to several experts about what the oil and gas industry is doing in response to the new laws and new technology. Equipment leaks, commonly referred as fugitive emissions, are characterized as unintentional emissions. Leaks occur from the equipment components such as connectors, valves, open-ended lines, pressure relief valves, and storage tank thief hatches. There are millions of such components that are prone to unintended leaks through natural gas supply chains. Leaks can be repaired when found, but some components are prone to eventually leak again. So let's take a look at how the industry is doing at reducing their emissions. Our first guest is Dr. Kathy Woody from Hess Corporation. All right, well, welcome, Kathy, to this episode of the Energy Transition Talk podcast. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, starting off, can you introduce yourself? Give us a little personal and industry background and tell us what got you into the environmental management side of oil and gas from a PhD in chemistry.
Sure. Yeah, I actually started in the oil and gas industry 14 years after I finished getting my PhD in chemistry from Georgia Tech. I spent the first decade of my career in research and development, where I led a number of technical programs focused on energy transition technologies. And then I did some work doing more investment focused roles that were identifying growth opportunities in the energy transition space. And then 3 years ago, I joined the Hess Corporation, and that's where I currently am sitting. And at Hess, I'm the technical authority on low carbon technology solutions, decarbonization technology. I spend a lot of time interfacing with external technology providers and different universities and companies to identify opportunities in energy transition and work internally with our teams to identify problems and scout for early stage solutions that are being developed to help us meet our emission reduction goals. So personally, I have 4 kids and 2 dogs, and that's kind of what motivates me to do work in this space. I really love the scale and the power of the oil and gas industry to both provide energy and opportunities for people, but also really passionate about making the future better for my children and their future as well.
Incredible, thank you.
So to get right into the meat of things, I guess my main question was, in your experience, how has emerging technologies changed the way the industry monitors and measures greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Technology for the measurement of emissions has truly become more accessible to the industry. Scientists have long understood that you cannot prevent what you cannot measure. So being able to visualize sources of emissions and leaks is really the first key step in mitigation. Now, what many people don't realize is that the massive amount of scale and acreage covered by oil and gas facilities makes this really challenging. So emissions detection is much easier when you have a finite footprint to monitor, such as a refinery, for example. However, in like the upstream and midstream oil and gas space, you are looking at covering hundreds of thousands of acres. So with respect to monitoring in particular, like methane emission monitoring, which is a big focal point for the industry, it's taken time for access to technologies that have both the resolution to see methane at the scale that we're talking about and that are not cost prohibitive at the same time to become more realistic. And that's the real changes that we've seen over the past decade.
And could you give us a little definition of what energy technology is or what it means?
Well, energy technology is such a big concept. What it means to me, I think, is the technology to not only provide energy to people at the um, at the cost point that they can afford, at the scale they need. Those are not trivial things. So any technology that is really focused on delivering affordable and low cost energy and doing it in a climate responsible way, that's really the what we strive for in energy technology.
Mm, okay.
And you mentioned earlier about, the scaling of everything within the oil and gas industry as far as emission monitoring goes. In your experience, is the industry making progress towards their decarbonization goals?
Yeah, there's really been so much progress, and that progress should absolutely be celebrated. But it's progress along a very long journey that still has plenty of challenges remaining on the road ahead. So, for example, most oil field equipment was originally designed to release gas, and this was to avoid pressure buildup that would lead to fatal safety events. So, it's a very important reason that it was designed this way. Now, innovation and technology is allowing us to safely move away from those designs, and get to reduced emissions or eliminate those emissions from the field. However, there are decades of old equipment and processes that we're talking such a tremendous scale. It just takes significant time and investment to really get up to date with those newer technologies. But I think the industry is very serious about this goal, to reduce emission, and I have seen some really fantastic steps that the industry has taken towards doing this that really extend far beyond just doing it because we have to. Um, that the industry is really focused on solving these problems.
And what are some of the biggest steps in the industry that they've taken to lower these methane emissions?
Sure. There's a lot of great examples of steps the industry has taken for drastic emission reductions. I think for upstream, the probably the biggest one to highlight is the flaring reduction initiatives that have been achieved through the build out of gas gathering infrastructure. Um, However, there's many more. There's elimination of high bleed pneumatics, leak detection and repair efforts, use of vapor recovery units, a lot of different examples of how both technologies and processes have changed to reduce emissions. But what's also important to point out is that the industry is having to do this while at the same time keep the focus on the most important thing, which is continuing to provide for affordable energy to its customers. Affordable energy is an absolute requirement because people cannot be asked to sacrifice, being able to afford their groceries or keep their house warm to accomplish these emission reduction goals, or they just won't have general public support. So this progress really should be, I think, celebrated, but we still have a long way to go.
Mhm.
Thank
And yeah. And each technology will have its own advantages and uncertainties. How accurate are they? And what areas do you think the general public needs to better understand about these benefits?
Yeah, the accuracy is with respect to methane emissions specifically. Accuracy is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and in my opinion, frankly, it gets in the way of progress. This hyper focus on accuracy, and that's because the error bars associated with a single measurement can be very wide, and varies depending on the technology type. So And on top of that, many of these technologies use a weather model to quantify those emissions, which introduce significant and variable errors. So why is this difficult? An example would be that a punitive rule that is written to penalize operators around a measured rate that does not include a potential error associated with a given measurement makes it really difficult for operators to understand how to best use the technology and really how to deploy it in a way that makes sense. So what I believe is more important, and what the general public should really understand, that establishing an accurate rate for a single measurement is not what's important here. It's really allowing the measurement to be used by operators to trend their data over time so that they can figure out what are the most impactful problems that need to be solved and then deploy their capital towards solving those problems. I think that the demands for measurement should not come at the expense of a company taking action to solve these critical problems. So it really needs to be a balanced approach.
When you're talking about this disconnect in communication, how well do you think that operators are explaining their investments?
I think that some operators tell this story quite well. I think as a whole, the industry continues to need to come together to highlight the progress being made, not just as we reduce these emissions, but communicating that we're still aiming to keep energy affordable along this pathway to more reduced emissions and environmental responsibility. And that really plays into the concept of environmental justice for communities as well.
Okay.
And previously you mentioned, with the different technologies of like leak detection, specifically, with the challenges of, identifying, locating, quantifying, and fixing these leaks, usually there's production operators and maintenance staff, even environmentalist specialists that help advocate and inspect for the general public that's involved in this process. How well are these communities at collaborating and understanding each other's priorities and goals?
So there's a lot of dialogue happening across these domains focused on solving these problems in a productive way. And personally, that's where I try to stay engaged, where the dialogues are driving towards real solutions. The challenge when you start bringing all of these different groups together is that they don't all have the same perspective of what's most important. And that's fair because these groups are balancing so many different competing priorities. They're balancing priorities of keeping costs down, of reducing emissions, of transparent reporting, community engagement, and then hopefully above all else, they're focused on safety. So when you have lots of different priorities to balance, you have to really make sure that when you introduce a solution, you're not just introducing new problems for another area of the business, and that's an important thing that we try to think of as we bring in new technology.
Mhm. And when we're talking about technology, we tend to focus mainly on the U.S., I guess, because we're all here in the U.S. But are these technology capabilities spreading around the globe? Do you see other communities using them? Are they expensive to deploy?
Yeah, so the technologies are definitely being tested around the globe. I've personally gotten to dialogue with industry professionals from the Middle East, South America, Africa, in addition to all of my North American colleagues who are working on this problem. Now, some of these solutions are being deployed faster in some regions than others. But I think as a whole across the globe, most operators have a very rigorous technology testing program to try out solutions, determine how they work for a given asset, because all of these different assets aren't the same, and they're going to have different challenges with integrating technology. But I think finding the technology is only one piece of the problem. There's also the implementation of the technology, the workflows, for example, to respond to emission events and solve those problems. And that's a great place where global sharing of best practices can enable this space to go faster. In terms of cost, the cost is still definitely a concern. I've already mentioned the importance of keeping energy prices low. That is a must. And every technology solution that we deployed comes at a cost. So, particularly in terms of measurement, I mean, personally, I would rather see the majority of capital deployed focused on actually eliminating the emissions.
Mhm.
So, we have to keep our measurement costs low.
Perfect. I actually just had like a follow-up question on that. When you say like keep the measurements low, so I just want to ask again, like the focus is really on the technology side.
Yeah, so the technology is important. And one of the things that I've really been impressed with is how operators have been able to take these different technologies. There's no one perfect measurement technology. All of them kind of come with limitations. They all have different use cases. But operators have been able to take these very disparate technologies and put them together to develop a monitoring portfolio that's both optimized for that cost, like keeping your costs down, but also to give us the best picture of our assets. So we're using things that include all the way up to satellites and aircraft, down to like drones and ground-based sensors. And we're putting all of that information together to kind of create that bigger picture of what's happening on our assets and get the data we need to solve the problem. But yeah, as you layer in more and more technologies, like that those costs can add up. So we're definitely working towards optimizing those solutions.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, Kathy, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real honor to have you on this podcast. But before we leave, is there anything else we forgot to ask you that you think is important to share with our audience?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here. I think the kind of parting thoughts that I would say in this conversation, we focused a lot on methane specifically, but carbon management, I mean, it extends beyond just methane emissions. It includes all CO2 emissions associated with the productions and use of energy. And there is so much innovation happening today across the industry. And I think, frankly, the people in the oil and gas industry are best equipped to really continue to build these low carbon projects and accelerate their adoption because the industry knows how to handle the hazards and the scale that comes along with these projects. And then last, I would say that the scale of global reliance on oil and gas is tremendous, and I think most people realize that this is just not a switch that can be turned off. I mean, virtually every household product, the majority of energy is derived from the oil and gas industry. So I think it's really important that we continue making progress here, while reducing our emissions, while also keeping energy costs affordable, in order to keep the momentum going. I think people will lose support for our objectives in reducing emissions if they can't afford their energy. And then there's so many people around the world that do not have access to energy at all at this point. So we need to continue really keeping those perspectives of environmental justice in mind and making sure that communities aren't being left behind.
Thank you so much.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you all. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Kathy Woody spends a lot of time interfacing with environmental technology companies and universities to keep up with emerging developments and participating in cross-disciplinary and cross-company dialogue.
Yeah, and as we heard, one of her job responsibilities is to be on the lookout for early stage solutions to problems for her company that has to meet their environmental and operational goals.
We've heard that she's motivated by the scale and power of the oil and gas industry and passionate about making the world better for her children.
Technology, with measurement is making a real difference. You can't manage what you can't measure.
Well, one of the unique challenges for the oil and gas industry is covering the very large acreage of oil and gas operations versus a concentrated plant scale like a refinery.
Yeah, and again, as we heard, she believes that there's been a lot of progress and that it should be celebrated, but we still have a long way to go before we get there.
Absolutely. The previous design of oil field equipment was set up to release gas to provide safe work environments. This is changing, but there's a lot of legacy equipment out there that really needs to be updated.
Yeah. And, there are many operators out in the field that are doing more than they have to comply with regulations. Efforts like, flaring reduction, LDAR, replacing high bleed pneumatics. But operators have to keep their focus on providing affordable energy to the public.
Well, accuracy with regard to methane emissions is one of the biggest barriers. Establishing a specific leak rate should not be the goal, but allowing operators to use measurement to track trends and better understand their emissions profile to eventually eliminate emission sources should be the main plan of action.
Yeah, and another perspective on it is, the stakeholders. Stakeholders have, competing priorities, so we have to watch out. We have to watch out by that by introducing a solution in one area and make sure that it doesn't cause problems in another.
Like in many other sectors, finding a technology solution is only one part of this challenge. The deployment and adoption is another, while cost is still a huge factor.
Yeah, and even though there's not one perfect technology for everyone, each has its own benefits and drawbacks. Now, the challenge is to create the bigger picture and to understand unique operating issues and how to handle them.
Well, carbon management extends way beyond methane. Professionals in the industry are best equipped to create the optimum solutions.
And we can't just flip the switch on oil and gas. We will need it for a long time to come, and we can't just forget the population that doesn't have access to affordable energy too. So we have to, consider all aspects.
Thank you so much for joining us for the future of energy. Special thanks to each of our guests today and to our technical wizard, Abhi, for his important contributions to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you can automatically get access to all our new episodes. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.